All right. So thank you all for joining us today, those of you who joined us. So this is our GLP study group for the RQAP exam credential for GLP. So I'm just going to, so this is our meeting plan. So this is our 5th week of the study group. So for all of you who've been joining previously, welcome back. And for any new attendees, welcome. So today we have with us myself. So I'll introduce myself, and we have Anita. And I think, is there anyone else on as an SME? I see Anita, and I see myself. All right. So Anita, please go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'll introduce myself, and then we'll go ahead and jump right into it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Habibi, and I have been a GLP QA since 2008, and I acquired my RQAP-GLP registration in 2011. And I hope that I can help regarding the test taking. Sherry does definitely very well. In the past few sessions that we had, everybody was very happy. So she does a great job. But feel free to ask your questions, and she will definitely answer them really nicely, clearly.
Thank you, Anita. So my name is Sherry Lee Dawson, and I am RQAP-GLP, of course. I wrote for the first time actually in 2001 and no 2002 and yes but it unfortunately I did pass but back then we didn't have enough training, so I didn't get enough units, so then I rewrote again in 2005, and I've maintained all my re-registrations. I've made sure to get the appropriate units. Once you write it and you pass it, you don't want to have to study and write it again. Not that there's anything wrong with the studying, and not that it's so horrible, but you know, think back. Would you want to go back and redo your schooling all over again? No. No. So that's why we have these groups. So I'll just explain a little bit how we've run the past ones. Feel free to ask questions at any time. The more you put into this, the more you get out. So this is not a training session. I'm not here to share my knowledge with you. I'm here to work with you and have discussions so we can all see how, the types of questions that there may be, and the types of answers, and how to look at it when you're doing that exam. So today's session is applied expertise, so evaluating and what to evaluate. So the topics included are the following. So I'm going to go through all the topics. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to raise it. If you're not asking a question or not speaking, please do keep yourselves muted until you ask a question, because this session is being recorded for anyone not able to join at this time. They can go back and review, or if you want to go back and re-listen to a discussion, you'll have that ability. So today we're covering the overall facility site operations, security management, and the functional performance of quality systems to assure the integrity, reliability, and usefulness of the data. Sorry, yeah, there's a typo there, but so the next one should start critical phase study inspections. That should be number 2 there. Sorry about that. Contract laboratories, facilities, and field sites, as well as vendors, subcontractors, and their associated systems for the capability to perform particular studies and adhere to GLP standards. Item 3, protocols and SOPs related to established procedures and available resources. 4, systems for auditing, inspecting, and/or tracking information related to GLPs. 5, corrective actions resulting from inspecting and monitoring. 6, internal organizational structure and lines of communication. 7, personal qualification records, e.g. the CV, job description, training records. And 8, training programs designed to support GLP compliance. So just in case you're wondering where this is coming from, if you go to the SQA online and you're looking up information concerning the RQAP credential in the candidate handbook, so it is there online, and you will see this. And if you scroll Sorry, I hope I'm not getting anyone dizzy. These are all the different topics we've covered in the session. So today is scrolling, applied expertise, and we're on evaluating. So it's these 8 that we're covering today. Okay, so I don't know if anyone has any questions on those topics at the moment. So typically what we've done is jumped into the quiz questions. So we do it together and we have a discussion once we see what the correct answer is. And then we evaluate, like, are there other potential things that might have been interpreted as a correct answer? And why was this one in particular the correct answer? We will, of course, offer some tips and tricks to consider when you are writing your exam, because there's it's a very long exam. So there are a lot of, ideas to help you be the most successful you can be when writing it. All right, so are there any questions at this time? Feel free to either raise your hand or put something in the chat. All right, I don't currently see any hands. So I will go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so our first question is, you are the new QA manager at a small laboratory. In the course of a facility record review, you cannot find any job descriptions, and it's likely that none have ever existed. You should notify management that no job descriptions exist, ask study directors for historical job description information, recommend that job descriptions be written quickly, document in every data package that no job descriptions exist. Select 1. 1 and 2 only, 1 and 3 only, 2 and 4 only, 3 and 4. So feel free to either raise your hand and identify what you think or put it in the chat. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of 2s. Are there any other responses people think it could potentially be? 1. Okay. All right, so let's look at the right answer, or the most correct answer. So the answer is 2. So you all put that in, so great job. And the reference is coming from the OECD Principles of GLP, sections 2.1, 1.1 to C1, and CFR Part 58, 130E. So testing facility management responsibilities at a minimum include ensure the maintenance of a record of the qualifications, training, experience, and job descriptions for each professional and technical individual. So the CV would qualify as, documentation and evidence of, training, education for their particular role. So let's assess some of these. So we have notify the management that no job descriptions exist. So that's the direct aspect of the GLPs, both OECD and FDA. Ask the directors for historical job description information. That would be okay, perhaps if it was a one-off. So for a particular study director, if you happen to be spot checking that during a study-based audit and see, ooh, someone doesn't have it, you might want to flag that. But keep in mind that CVs are outside of direct study conduct. They're support, right, for your GLP studies. So it really is more of a facility type issue versus like one individual. So recommend that job descriptions be written quickly. Yes. We want to obviously recommend corrective actions. That's what QA should be doing. And we want to make sure that any gaps that we see, especially as a facility, that do get corrected as quickly as possible. And then document in every data package that no job descriptions exist. That may not that may not be the best approach. Some companies may do that because they see it as a deviation, a GLP deviation, and they may want to have that in their study records. The study director signing off on that, but it's not the most correct answer at in terms of the actual issue. So, any thoughts, comments on this question?
Yeah, I can see probably someone would say 2, because there are times that in small companies, sometimes they ask us the QA to help to write up the job descriptions. So that could be possibly that a site would, think that the QA should do that. So that I can see that. And then to your point, the last one, I don't think is the greatest vision, because you can't just write it up and walk away. You need to, it's a critical aspect that management need to be notified immediately, and that it needs to be corrected as soon as possible. So that's why just writing it up and notifying manager is not the best option.
Agreed. Does anyone else have any comments on that, or potential ways that this could be not necessarily misunderstood, but one of the things that you're going to see is potentially this one was fairly simple, but some of the questions won't be as simple. There's generally going to be 4 responses, and typically there's 1, maybe 2 that you can write off right away going, no, that's definitely not the answer. But there's usually there's obviously 1 correct answer, but quite often you're going to have at least a second one that's very plausible. So you definitely have to take the time to read the question, make sure you understand what they're asking. There is a lot of questions in what seems to be a very short period of time, but it's very manageable. But definitely don't take too long on one. If you're revisiting and having to think it all out, then just annotate that one and jump over it. I highlighted it because every time I do a session, I forget where I read it in the information. But as you can see, the exam consists of 165 questions, and 15 of them are not being scored. So that means there's 150 questions that you're being graded on. And you have those 15 that are not being scored, those are evaluated to determine if they should be included in future exams. Because as questions perhaps get less successful, because they do track, the success rates of the exams and the questions themselves. So if they see a particular question is constantly having no one getting it right, they may swap it out. Because sometimes, as information evolves, people start having slightly different interpretations or understanding. And, the purpose of this exam is not to really trick you out so you don't become a professional, a registered professional. It's really to ensure that you do have the true knowledge, but it's not trying to trick you. And you have 3.5 hours to complete the exam. So approximately, 55 questions per hour, giving yourself a half hour of flex in there. So you don't have 5 minutes per question. So that's why you do want to make sure you take the time to read the question well and make sure you understand what's being asked. The exam is on FDA GLP, EPA GLP, as well as OECD GLP. So for the most part, OECD and FDA GLPs and EPA, they're all very, very similar. There is one of the documents that is in your recommended reading items that does a compare of the 3. For the most part, there's very few differences. The biggest changes tend to be around terminology, and more in terms of, for example, OECD and EPA may specify, this is TFM's responsibility, whereas under FDA, they still have that requirement in there, but they haven't specifically said that this is TFM's responsibility. So that's really the huge differences that you're going to see in there. There are obviously others, but the question also should generally help you understand who you are, what regulations are coming from. So because when they say notify management, generally you're looking at FDA, and the default typically will be FDA GLPs. SQA is a US organization, even though we are international. The source, the original development is US based. When you see terms like study plan, that's kind of a big indicator. It's OECD. When you see reference reference standard, the standard, sorry, now I'm blanking on my EPA terms, but I think it's standards, right? The test article, test reference article, and reference
Test
standard.
substance?
Pardon?
Isn't it test substance?
Thank you, test substance.
That
So
what
when
it-
you see that term, that's your big indicator. It's an EPA. So just so you can, again, go to the proper mind frame, thinking space. All right, so if there's no questions on this one, we will jump to the next question. So these study sessions only have 5 questions. They all come from the practice exam that you can certainly sign up to do. And of course, these 30 questions are not in your actual formal exam, unfortunately. Okay, sample exam questions. Question 2, study 456 requires testing to be conducted in compliance with 21 CFR Part 58 according to its protocol. Lab XYZ performed the pathology portions of study 456. Lab XYZ uses one procedure for processing and preparations of slides, and the procedure is repetitive in nature. The QA statement in the pathology report shows that a process-based inspection was performed to monitor GLP compliance during the conduct of the pathology portion of a study. With which of the following did Lab XYZ fail to comply? Select 1. A, nothing, as it is the test facility and not the test site that is responsible to have its QAU perform critical phase inspections. B, nothing, as process-based inspection is valid for procedures used that are repetitive in nature. C, perform critical phase inspections for work done on study 456. D, amend the protocol to specify that the QAU will do process-based inspections during the conduct of the pathology portion of the study. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of C's. Are there any other things? Any other potential responses?
One of the old ones that the people who have attended previously know the answer.
Oh. All right, so the correct answer is C. The quality assurance unit shall inspect each non-clinical laboratory study at intervals adequate. And this is coming from 21 CFR Part 5835B3. At intervals adequate to assure integrity of the study, maintain written and properly signed records of each periodic inspection showing the date of the inspection, the study inspected, the phase or segment of the study inspected, the person performing the inspection, findings and problems, action recommended and taken to resolve existing problems, and any scheduled date for reinspection. Any problems found during the course of inspection which are likely to affect study integrity shall be brought to the attention of the study director and management immediately. So that is deemed the correct answer. Now, something to highlight, when you're taking the exam, think of the most conservative approach based on the regulations. Some of you may not actually do this response at your actual facility. And one of the things that isn't made clear is Lab X, Y, and Z perform the pathology portion. It doesn't stipulate if Lab X, Y, Z is following 21 CFR Part 58. They could be in Canada or in Europe and actually following OECD. So while the study is following FDA regulations, you wouldn't follow the regulations that are outside of your country. So if Lab XYZ is only doing the path phase and is OECD based, a process-based inspection would be an acceptable response. So that's the type of thing that you don't want to overanalyze the question. And that's why by default, you're going to assume everything is under FDA. Now, if they were trying to point out the differences between FDA and OECD, they would say Lab XYZ, which follows OECD principles, perform da-da-da. And then the response certainly would be B, because under OECD principles, process-based inspections are an appropriate method for using process-based inspections for routine and repetitive functions. All right. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add on that?
Well, I mean, something else is that also sometimes maybe people have the protocols in a way that is specifies that test site is responsible for their portion of critical phases. So that's not said in here. If they said the protocol specified then I can see number 1 would have been okay as well, but it did not. So that's why number 1 is not okay or fully accurate.
Absolutely. Do the regulations specifically define the difference between process-based inspections and critical phase inspections? Under OECD, your principles, they talk to your study-based, process-based, and facility-based inspections. Under FDA, there is no defined terms. There is just that the QAU must audit the activity, must audit critical, what's the actual term? It's written right there. Inspect each non-clinical laboratory study at intervals adequate to assure the integrity of the study and maintain written and properly signed records. So whatever, and that's why typically we use the term critical, because it's QA is going to evaluate the aspects at appropriate activities that are critical to the study, right? If you have a severely complex dosing regime, you're not going to just do a body weight audit on the study and be fine with it, you know. So that's the type, that's pretty much where the term critical is coming from. But strictly speaking, under FDA, those terms are not defined because there's nothing in the FDA GLPs that refer to the difference. Under OECD principles, there is definition of study-based, which is what typically people will use as critical phase, and then your process, and of course your facility. But great question, Ashton. All right, so I think we beat this one to death. Let's move on to the next question. All right, so question 3, documentation that an SOP deviation was reported by the principal investigator, PI, to key study personnel was not found in the study file. The PI informed the auditor that the sponsor was informed and approved the SOP deviation during a teleconference. This is, select 1, A, not acceptable, quality assurance did not approve the deviation. B, not acceptable, the study director should have been informed and allowed to assess impact. C, not acceptable, the PI should have been informed and allowed to assess the impact. D, acceptable, the PI and sponsor both approved and assessed impact of the deviation. All right, so I'm seeing some mostly B's coming in. Are there any other responses that you think could be potential? All right, so let's go to the answer. So the answer is actually B, not acceptable. The study director should have been informed and allowed to assess impact. So of course, we're talking about principal investigator, so a PI. That is definitely your OECD multi-site guidance source. So we refer to the OECD document 13, multi-site guidance, for the correct answer. Page 12 of 17 on principal investigator. Deviations from the study plan or standard operating procedures related to the study should be documented at the test site, be acknowledged by the principal investigator, and reported to and acknowledged by the study director in a timely manner. So who can explain why the study director needs to acknowledge the deviation?
Subject is the focal point of the study.
Yes, they are the single point of control. So I'm sure you've hopefully seen that term over and over in both FDA and OECD and EPA. Study director is the single point of control of a study. So they have to be aware of everything. Now, can anyone think of maybe perhaps examples? Yeah, 5833C is FDA. It's also an FDA similar reference. Thank you. Thank you, Ashton. So yes. As I said, the OECD, FDA, and EPA all have a lot of similarities. Like I would say, they're a good somewhere between 85 to 90% pretty much the same, maybe reworded or subtle differences, but there's very limited big differences between them. The OECD reference was used because it is multi-site and the term principal investigator, so that's really the source of it. But absolutely, the single point of control is referenced under all of them. Now, can anyone think of perhaps an example of when this can happen? Not that it's an accepted practice, but instances where they may have heard or seen it happen at their site, or in a different scenario where it could potentially happen, that this situation could happen. And because I have one off the top of my head that traditionally when you start following multi-site guidance, there are some things there. Anybody? Balance being used without calibration? Sure. Yeah, that could happen. Exactly. That could be potentially a facility issue that may or may not have impact on the phase or whatnot. Absolutely. So one of the examples I was thinking of is what traditionally used to happen at my site many, many years ago when we were going from when we were first implementing multi-site guidance all those years ago, was that because, for example, the lab-based work, we would run a validation, and the individual who becomes the PI on the study, they were in constant communication directly with the sponsor because they were the study director of the validation. So they already had that rapport of if there was an issue or if there's questions, just going back and forth with the study director, with the sponsor. Once we hit sample analysis, because they already have that relationship and habit of working directly just between them and the sponsor, if something came up with the issue that was causing problems with the sample, initially they would forget to include the study director because they're already thinking, I was the study director on this study and it was just me and him. And then once they become the PI, they forget to include that study director. So obviously we quashed that practice very quickly, but it can happen, especially when you go from that single point of control for the validation and then turn into they're acting as PI. So that is something definitely to think about. Yeah. Any questions or anything else to share on this one? It's a very quiet group today. Do keep in mind that the more you talk, the more that you participate, the more you get out of this, because I haven't written the exam in 20 years or 19 years. So I can share my experience, but the exam was very, very different from, would have been very different. Mind you, to be fair, I wrote it for the first time when it included OECD.
Well,
Impact now.
One thing helps that ruling out when I read the question and the possible answers, like A, I can right away rule out. There's nothing to do. D also kind of, then we can do B and C debate, and make out the best one.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's exactly right. You want to look for what are the easy ones. If you're unsure, what are the ones to easily take out? And answer A, though, if you are a smaller facility that runs things and follows both GLP, GCP, and GMPs, that may not trigger you that, hey, that's not a GLP thing, right? Quality assurance does approve deviations in a GMP world. So so it's always, remember, focus on your GLPs. Joydy, so impact analysis is also responsibility of the study director. Thank you. Yes. The impact is the responsibility of the study director. Ideally, though, the principal investigator should be assessing the impact to their work, right? Because the study director may not, especially if it's something like the example Sunitha gave, balance being used without calibration. The study director may not know what if that impacts the phase. So ideally, you want to have your PI assess the impact for their work, and then the study director assesses the impact to the overall study and data integrity. So it's something to keep in mind. But yes, super important. All right, let's jump to the next question. Question 4. Study directors report to a senior director. The senior director reports to test facility management. When auditing the job descriptions and resumes for these two positions, what would the auditor expect to find? Select 1. The senior director has authority to assign study directors to study and has delegation from test facility management. The senior director has at least 5 to 10 years experience with GLP, and test facility management has 10 or more years managing laboratory personnel. The senior director has a PhD and test facility management has a PhD and an MBA. The senior director and test facility management have had experience at another CRO. All right, so I'm seeing a whole bunch of A's. So this is one of those questions that is generally going to be one of those Reddit, it's pretty obvious, correct answer, and we move on. This one should not take lots of your time on the exam. And yes, you were all correct. The senior director has authority to assign study directors to study and has delegation from test facility management. So 21 CFR Part 5831A, testing facility management for each non-clinical laboratory study, testing facility management shall designate a study director as described in 5833 before the study is initiated. Great. So I think this is a perfect example of not every question on the exam is going to be like a mind-bending, oh my God, so it could be this or it could be that one. It's, yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. And you're going to appreciate those when you have those complicated ones going, oh my God. So again, time is often of the essence. So if you're taking too long, pin it and go on. Jumping back to our handbook. I did see it down here. Be sure to answer each examination question before ending the examination. There's no penalty for guessing. So if you're not sure, put in a response, but you can, on the online system, you can actually, it will show you before you actually start the exam, you get a little bit of playtime to get comfortable with the system itself before the exam launches. And it will show you how to actually tag it so you can go. So you can go back to flagged questions at the end of the exam, so you can flag it. And also, if you just choose you truly don't know, you can go back to the unanswered. But worst case scenario, if you start seeing that you're running out of time and you're like taking too long, just say, okay, well, I'm going to put an answer in there, flag it, so I can come back to it when I have more time at the end. But go through your first round. And one of the other important things is trust your gut instinct. You know, you've been studying for this. You use it hopefully in your day-to-day. Most of you are hopefully still active GLP QA auditors. That's why you're writing the GLP RQAP exam. So trust your first instinct. If you're not 100% sure, flag it, but go with your first instinct. Generally, your first instinct will be correct. All right, question 5. When assessing a contract research organization, CRO, for use as a test site on OECD GLP studies, which of the following is the most critical item for the CRO to fix before a phase of the study is conducted at this particular CRO? Select 1. So first of all, this is great because it does point out we're looking at OECD. The GLP archive is not on site. there is not clear designation from test facility management to study director. The standard operating procedures are not approved by test facility management. There is adequate separation available to the test systems. All right, so the majority of you have put C. And the answer is B. OECD Principles of GLP, Section 277.1. A test facility should have written SOPs approved by test facility management that are intended to ensure the quality and integrity of the data generated by that test facility. Revisions to SOPs should be approved by test facility management. So the GLP archive, it doesn't need to be on site. Some companies are of a smaller size or physically, geographically don't have the space for an archives. And that's perfectly okay. There's certainly lots of different ways you can have a temporary archive and then ship it to a more permanent archive. So it doesn't actually need to be on site. There's not clear delegation from test facility management to study director. So in terms of delegation, that would be a problem if TFM is not assigning the study director. However, keep in mind that this is a test site, so they wouldn't be acting as a study director in the first place. And if there are issues potentially with designation, if you go to your OECD multi-site guidance document, you don't have to have test site management requirements there. Test facility management and study director can cover those required aspects. SOPs, that's the biggest one. If they don't have management approved SOPs, that's a big gap. And that is going to be your biggest gap that you do need to fix. Everything else can be worked around procedurally, but if you're assessing a company to do work that you potentially can't do in-house, that's going to be very challenging for the test facility management and or the study director to approve procedures because they might not have that expertise. And adequate separation of the test systems. Well, typically the test systems are going to be held at your test facility, not your test site, right? Because generally it's your test facility that's running that is the core of the study, and then test studies usually doing a phase of the study. All right, are there any other questions or anything? So that was our last test question. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor to any questions you have, either about any of the quiz questions that we had, any topics that you're concerned about, any questions about the exam itself.
It looks like these questions were very straightforward. There weren't a lot of.
Yeah. And the content in this module, if we do go back and look, it was a smaller percentage. So this, ignore the yellow. The yellow was just when I was preparing the presentations. But we lumped all compliance assessments in together because that's truly the core of what QA is. So all of those things were done. These were repeats. Okay. Well, I am sorry that there are repeats. I had prepared them differently. So there were two presentations I didn't prepare. So perhaps those one got mixed into a different presentation. But this is a smaller section in terms of applied expertise. It is 10% for evaluating. We also had the advising, and if I can go back to, sorry, just to jump back. Next week's session will be on the applied expertise, advising and what to advise on. So there's definitely a lot more content. So there's 22 items that are covered and 18% of the exam is based on that. So it is a smaller topic. But
Sherry, I was wondering what percentage would be among the choices multiple to multiple answer?
I don't know. I think in terms of that, it's truly going to depend on your your knowledge, your how much you've studied and how much potentially what you're used to seeing. From what I remember when I wrote the exam, I would say that there's maybe two handfuls, 10 or 15 questions tops that were truly, I took a guess because I'm not really sure. So out of 165, it's definitely less than 10% that are truly like, I'm not sure that I feel that there's a true clear answer.
Yeah, those are the ones.
Yeah.
Like you choose the best one. Other is
Exactly.
also correct, but not the best, you know.
Absolutely. And that is important to remember. Always, that's why I say when you're approaching these exam questions, go in with a conservative, strictest sense of the regulations. It may not be what your site does. I can tell you. So I started my QA career in 1999. And after my 2 years in QA, I wanted to write the exam. So I started studying for it. And anytime we did something that was, I'm not going to say against the regulations, right? Because there's a lot of gray area, but I'm like, in all my meetings, is that really the best thing to do? Until finally my supervisor at the time, she said, for those of you studying for the exam, Sherry, this is our interpretation. We feel comfortable we can defend this, but other people may say, no, this isn't the strictest sense of it. So definitely, take it, with a grain of salt. And when I'm talking back 1999, I will say I wasn't Charles River back then. But so it truly is, not to say that everyone's approach, if you're part of the GLP especially section, you can see a lot of questions come in and everyone has different takes on things, and that's perfectly okay. What it comes down to is, can you defend your practice? Is it against the regulations or not? But in the exam, pretend that you are a regulator. These are the rules. If this is a scenario you're seeing, would you be able to cite them in this example? So take it that way and not like, well, my site does that. I don't see why it's a problem. Okay.
I think if I can say something, the reason for that being, like our last example, is that most protocol, for example, talk about QA of a test site, right? So if your site usually talks about what QA of a test site needs to do, yes, that makes sense for you to do that. And it's absolutely not wrong, it's absolutely not out of compliant. But that's why we say read the question very carefully. The question did not say the protocol is stated as such, and that's why it's not the best answer. So to your Sherry's point, don't just go based on what you do immediately. Read the question and see what the question is asking for.
Yeah.
How much information they give you. The lack of information and the information that they have given you, that's the one that helps you to choose the best response.
Absolutely. Are there any additional questions and stuff? I don't want to just keep everyone here for the sake of using up our full hour. Do you want to, answer any questions people might have?
It looks like it was easy session.
Yes, it was an easy session this week. I just will point out one of the things. If something is asking for something weird, like which are one of the things you should not do, the word will generally be highlighted and in caps so that you don't just, what's the best thing to do, and go and answer. So take that extra 5 seconds to read the question carefully before you answer. All right, it doesn't seem like there's any additional questions. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Anita, again, for your fantastic advice and support with all these questions and stuff. And with that, I wish you, for those of you writing the exam, I wish you well. And thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Sherry. See you next week. Bye.